So I am videotaping this on May 23rd. Um, this is in response to Steve Shives' video in support of Joe Biden. Steve made a... He basically highlighted that he admits that Joe Biden is absolutely complicit in the ongoing genocide in Gaza, but goes on to say you should vote for Joe Biden anyways, because otherwise the scary orange man will become president. And I think that that's just idiocy for a number of reasons. And he basically lays it at someone's feet because, well, if we don't vote for Joe Biden, then the orange man will become president. And I don't know why he thinks that, but I don't know. So I'm going to try and address a few of his issues. First of all, I want to introduce myself and sort of get out who I am. I have 2 degrees, one in political science, one in urban development / public education, or not public education, public administration. So I know a bit about elections. I even worked as an elections administrator at my University of Washington. So, and I've worked on a congressional campaign here in Washington State. I do intend to address the issues in Gaza, but I want to first address the other issues, because I think Mr. Shives doesn't fully understand American democracy and how it works. I don't think Steve is completely wrong, or is stupid, but I think that he believes that things like the national popular vote matter. And that's just not true. In fact, in reality, the national popular vote is just a thing that appears on CNN, on MSNBC, and on Fox News to give people an easy idea of who might be winning. Because in reality, the president is not chosen by the national popular vote. In fact, there is no such thing as the national popular vote in our U.S. political system. The president is chosen by 50 separate elections, and technically 51 separate elections, if you include the District of Columbia, 52 if you include Puerto Rico, and also international. It's complicated, but 50 separate elections in 50 states. And each state gets a certain number of electors who then vote on their vote for president. That's how it works. Some states require that their electors vote with the popular vote of that state. Other states have no such requirement. My home state of Washington does not require our electors to vote with Washington State, but it does fine faithless electors that do not vote with the popular vote of Washington State. So there is a middle ground with that. The largest state in the largest number of electors that a state can have, well, first of all, electors, the minimum number is 3, because it's based on both population and number of senators. Each state has 2 senators and a various number of congressmen. States like Texas and Florida Texas has 40, California has 54, Florida 38, New York 28. But, Wyoming will have 3 electoral votes. So, while this is great for states like New York, Texas, Florida, even Washington State to some degree, which gets 14 electoral votes, if I'm not mistaken. It doesn't work out all that well for Wyoming, because they don't get it, and it doesn't even work out all that great for California, which, despite having 50 or the most electoral votes and being the most populous state, no presidential candidate is going to go there, because guess what? Joe Biden is going to win California regardless. And Donald Trump's not going to visit there, because guess what? Joe Biden's going to win California regardless. So there's no point in either of them visiting California. Same thing with Washington, same thing with Oregon. And this also screws over people who might be socialists and who might be Green Party or even Green Party candidates or Libertarian candidates, or if you prefer RFK. Because if you're a Green Party or socialist living in Seattle or Austin, guess what? You're screwed, because guess what? It's going to go to, even if you're voting for Congress, guess what? It's going to the Democratic candidate. And if you're living in Seattle, going to the Democratic candidate. If you're living in Tulsa, it's going to the Republican candidate. You're screwed. So democracy doesn't matter there. Moving on. Most states are plurality victory, meaning the candidates do not need to gain a majority in order to win elections. They just need to get more votes than any other candidate. So if there are 3 candidates in the election, one candidate gets, say, 40%, another candidate gets, and the other 2 candidates get 30 and 30. The candidate with 40% wins. But that doesn't sound like a democratic thing, because the majority of people, 60%, voted against them. That sounds pretty undemocratic. But still, that candidate, so we'll take Joe Biden versus Donald Trump and we'll take RFK. We'll say in Washington State, Joe Biden wins 40% of Washington State, RFK gets 30, Donald Trump gets 30. Joe Biden would get all of Washington's electoral votes, because Washington State is a winner-takes-all state. That doesn't seem reasonable or democratic. So 30% of Washington State, well, 60% of Washington State really, don't get a vote in who becomes president. That seems unreasonable. Now, as stated, the president is not chosen by popular vote, but by 50 separate state elections. It seems Mr. Shives has shared. So Mr. Shives lives in Maryland. So I'm going to try and show how the demographic makeup of states can change elections. And I'm going to try and use his home state of Maryland to do so. So Maryland is kind of a weird state, but it's similar to Washington State in some ways and different in other ways. But Maryland is dominated by its sort of, if you're familiar with the East Coast, it's got sort of a weird inlet that juts up the center of the coast where Baltimore is located. It's dominated by the economic activity of the city is dominated by Baltimore. And Baltimore is primarily votes Democratic. The state has about 6.2 million people. Baltimore's greater metropolitan area has about 2.8 million. Outside of the Baltimore area, primarily votes Republican. But I'll tell you something. Unless someone like Donald Trump wins all of everywhere outside of Baltimore, it's very likely that Joe Biden is going to win Maryland, because the majority, the vast majority of people in Baltimore are going to vote for Biden, because that's just how it works. So all of those votes in Maryland, all those electoral votes are going to go for Biden. But I want you to ask yourself, how does that make those people, those 4 million Republicans, feel that 2.8 million people are making the decisions for them? Again, it doesn't sound terribly democratic. I'm not a Republican, I'm socialist. So in similar ways, a Republican in Seattle has no vote on who becomes their congressman. Because guess what? There's no chance of a Republican winning in Seattle. I want to move on to this specific election and what's going to be happening nationally. This year's election is, as I've stated, it's 50 separate elections. Most of the elections are pretty much already decided. Texas is going to be going to a Republican. Mississippi is going to be going to a Republican. Washington, California, Oregon are going to Democrats. Maryland and Virginia very likely going to Biden. Most of the Northeast going to Biden. So that's very predictable. Those states going to Biden. Virginia's possibly not going to Biden, but very likely going to Biden. There are a number of states that could go either way, and those are Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada. And only one of these states, Joe Biden, is actually polling positively, and that's Michigan. So, like, I don't know what Mr. Shives is like arguing for here. Like, so at one point in his video, Mr. Shives refers to people who are animated by Gaza as one-issue voters. Sure, well, I don't completely disagree that some people are probably one-issue voters. I think that it's more complicated than that. Certainly, a lot of the young people who are on campuses and are protesting, that might be their big issue right now. But if you look at the polling on the economy, people do not feel well on the economy. Biden has done terribly on the economy. Wages have not kept up with inflation. Housing is terrible. Bidenomics are just failing left and right. I have personally felt this. I left a reasonably good paying job to take a new job in Seattle, Washington, and was then told within a week of taking said job that, oh, we don't have enough money to keep you on anymore. Goodbye. What? I left a job for you. And on top of that, Biden is the one who got rid of all the COVID era social safety net programs that were keeping people afloat. And if you think about it, so Biden's own Department of Housing and Urban Development has admitted that a person working $15 an hour, working 40 hours a week, cannot afford rent in any county in the United States. I want to emphasize that. Cannot afford rent. Not cannot afford a home, cannot afford rent. Now, it might be true that Joe Biden has created 15 million jobs. That's certainly possible. But is it true that he created 15 million separate jobs? Has he employed 15 million separate people? Or has he employed 5 million people working 3 jobs? Or some, one person working as an Uber driver and working a retail job and then working as a Lyft driver, et cetera, something like that. These are different things that are not supporting an actual lifestyle, that aren't supporting any sort of real life, that aren't leading to someone buying a home. I'm going to point out again, it took candidate Biden promised to get rid of all student debt. And it took Biden 3 years to even address student debt. And when he did address it, guess what? It was a lot less than than his promises were supposed to be. So I don't think that people are being unreasonable by making demands of Biden. Because when Biden has actually done something, it's been far later than he should have done it. Take, for example, his signature piece of legislation. Now, I actually had to study the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, guess what? You're going to be surprised by this. Well, it does include some investments in green energy and some investments in green infrastructure. It's mostly an add-on to appease the progressives in Biden's caucus. The majority of the money for that bill is either for hard infrastructure or for oil and coal companies. About 73% is for oil and coal or for GM. That's not what we want. I mean, that's not going to help anybody. To put it short, Americans have seen their lives become worse and worse over Biden's tenure. And the few actions Biden has taken to address the economic issues facing their lives have been too little and too late. And the economic issues have become worse and worse under Biden. So I just think that Biden's response to the Palestine conflict is the straw that broke the camel's back. So before I fully address Gaza, before I fully address the Gaza conflict, I should address two issues that Mr. Shives did not address in his video. First, the definition of genocide as agreed upon by the UN in the 1948 Genocide Convention, and as well the principle of command responsibility. First, genocide is defined by the UN as a mental element with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. 2, a physical element, which includes the following 5 acts, enumerated exhaustively. 1, killing members of the group. 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of a group. 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. 5, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. 6, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Right. And command responsibility. If you're a member of of any military, really, you should know what command responsibility is. It is a legal standard in international law which states that any officer who is in command of troops or any political officer who commands armies is responsible for the troops under their command. If the troops under their command take part in unethical actions or, say, commit war crimes, and the officer does not take actions to stop said war crimes, then the officer is just as responsible as the troops who committed said war crimes. As of the writing of this video, or of this script, 34,000 Gazans have been killed in the Palestinian conflict. At least an additional 77,000 are suspected to be wounded or dead. Since October 7th, Joe Biden has personally intervened at the United Nations Security Council, blocking multiple ceasefires and certainly blocking the creation of a Palestinian state. Joe Biden has provided over 100 separate weapons transfers and 100% of the Spark weapons to the Israeli Defense Forces, currently launching offensives into Gaza, Lebanon, and the West Bank. Joe Biden has furnished the Israeli state with all of the weapon shipments since October 7th, only two of which were approved by the U.S. Congress. Now, I have no doubt that the U.S. Congress would have approved the majority, at least, of these weapon shipments. But at least that would have provided an air of legitimacy to this war. These weapons all included 2,000-pound bunker-busting bombs, weapons with a blast radius of at least 600 feet, and that's on the lower end. Further, Joe Biden has taken military and economic action against states and non-state actors acting on behalf of Gaza and Palestine, and sees, such as when the Yemeni Houthis chose to board any ship within their territorial waters, and chose to seize military hardware bound for Israel. This was done in order to enforce the 1948 Anti-Genocide Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, a convention to which the U.S. is a party and Joe Biden is supposed to be enforcing. In response to this act, Joe Biden chose to place the Houthis back onto the terrorist watch list and began bombing the Houthis, which doesn't sound like Joe Biden is a terribly good guy or good at doing anything. It sounds like Joe Biden is kind of pretty pro-war, pretty pro-war guy, pretty pro-genocide actually. Finally, it should be noted that the U.S. already provides $2.7 billion to Israel every year. Every year, $2.7 billion. Joe Biden is not simply complicit. Joe Biden has actively supported and taken part in the crimes that are currently ongoing in Gaza. Now, I'm not saying that you should vote for Donald Trump or that you should vote for Joe Biden. I am saying that Joe Biden is a active participant in genocide. We know what is going on and what will happen under Joe Biden. We know that the economy will not be great under Joe Biden. We know that there is a terrible economy. We do not know what will happen under Donald Trump or under RFK or Cornel West, whoever becomes president, if it's not Joe Biden. We do not know if Donald Trump will try, if Joe Biden wins again this time, we do not know if Donald Trump will try and run again in 2028. So we might just be in the same place yet again. So what is the point? My point is this. The United States may not actually be as democratic as Mr. Shives believes it to be. Certainly, the economy is not as great as he believes it to be. And certainly, Mr. Biden is not as great as he believes Mr. Biden is. The one thing I can say is, for certain, is we need a change. I can't say that's Donald Trump. I can't say it's RFK. But I can say it's not Joe Biden.